Okay, hello everyone. So today we are going to give you an overview of the SAT test. So for those of you who are preparing with my series of videos, this should probably be the very first video you watch. So, alright, let's talk about the SAT. So, the SAT is a test that is required for admission at many of America's colleges. Most colleges these days will accept either the SAT or the ACT, which I also teach. Both tests are a pretty good measurement of a student's high school experience and their abilities. They do measure different things. In general, the SAT is the harder of the two tests and kind of the preferred test at a lot of the more premier colleges in America. So anyway, it's a standardized test that examines a very limited amount of skills. It's certainly not a measure of how smart you are or how well you're going to do in college. It's just a test. As people like to say, the SAT doesn't really measure anything except your ability to take the SAT. And I completely agree with that, and that's why SAT prep is such a useful process, because if you know what to expect, just like anything else in life, if you do your research, if you know what to expect, you can improve your performance significantly. So let's talk about the SAT. So first of all, there are three main sections on the SAT. They are critical reading, math, and writing. These are my abbreviations for the three, which I will continue to use throughout these lessons. Each one of these main sections is scored from 200 to 800. 200 is the lowest, 800 is the highest, which means that you have a total of 2,400 possible points. Now, very few people actually achieve 2,400. It's extremely difficult to do so, but that is the total number of points that you have. And one thing that my students like to ask me at the beginning of my SAT courses or at the outset of our private tutoring sessions is, what's a good score on the SAT? Which is, a very valid question, especially because they use this bizarre, 2,400 point scale, which students aren't really used to. I think it would be a lot easier if they just gave you a score out of 100. But anyway, a good score, it's hard to say. I mean, a good score really is the best score that you can get. And I understand in some ways that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it really is true. Everything is relative. You want to get a sense of where you're scoring now. Maybe you've taken the PSAT already. Most students can improve somewhere between 200 and 300 points if they have the right instruction and they work hard. It depends on where you're starting. Lower scoring students obviously have more room for improvement. If you're already scoring 2,200, obviously it's impossible for you to improve 300 points, but you get the idea. Every student can make a significant improvement in his or her SAT score. In terms of what's a good score, if you want to just have a benchmark, the average score is approximately a 1,500. So if you score a 1,500 combined, which means 500 on each section, you're right about at that 50th percentile line. So above 500 is over 50th percentile, below 500 is below 50th percentile. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the critical reading, math, and writing sections. Now, of those three main sections, there's three subsections for each section. So let's start with the critical reading. The critical reading has 67 questions total, and there are three subsections. So we'll talk about those three subsections, the questions and the time. First section, 24 questions. Second section, 24 questions. Last section is 19 questions. First section is 25 minutes. Second section is 25 minutes. Last section is 20 minutes. Okay, well, what's on this critical reading section, you might ask? In other words, what's the content? Well, there's two things. They always start with sentence completions. So those are those, fill in the blank type sentences where you need to know a lot of vocabulary. And then the rest of it is reading passages. So the vast majority of the questions on the critical reading section are reading passage questions. And we will talk about those in detail later, but for now you just need to know that that's what's being tested on the critical reading section. And then the second section is the math section, and that has 3 sections as well. Takes a little while to erase here, but I'll get there eventually. Okay. Oops. There we go. All right. So we'll talk about the math section now. There are 54 questions total on the math section. And if we break it down section by section again, your first section is going to have 20 multiple choice questions. Your second section will have 18 questions. That's split between multiple choice and grid-in questions, or provide your own answer questions. And then the final section is 16 questions long. And then in terms of time, again, it's 25, 25, and 20. So the content for all of these math questions is going to be multiple choice, grid-ins. As I said before, that means providing your own answer. And in terms of what's tested itself, it's mostly just algebra and geometry. There's a little bit of pre-cal in there, really not too much. It's mostly basic math. They're not really trying to test how much math you've memorized. They're more trying to test your logic and the way that you can manipulate numbers and think logically. So that's the math section. And of course, if you want to learn more about the math section, I'm going to be continuing creating these videos. We can talk about all sorts of concepts that are tested on the SAT. Just check my YouTube account for more videos in that respect. And then finally, we're in a bit of a rush because YouTube limits us to 10 minutes, but the final section here is the writing section. There are 50 questions total if you include the essay. Right, so you're going to have the essay, and then you have a 35 question section, and then you have a 14 question section. And the first section is 25 minutes long. Now, incidentally, this is always the first section of the test. I think that's nice because you can get the essay out of the way and then worry about the multiple choice. Obviously, there's only one question on the essay. The 35 questions section is 25 minutes long, and the 14 question section is always the last section of the test, and that's 10 minutes long. And then in terms of totals for the entire test, there are 171 questions, including the essay, and it's a 3-hour, 45-minute test. So quite a long test. Just remember that no one problem is going to make or break your score on the SAT because it's such a long test. You just want to be prepared, and you want to have a very consistent approach to the test. So there's your SAT overview, and the next lesson that you should watch is the scoring system lesson.